This is the setup of Xabi Alonso's Bayer Leverkusen, a system with 3 defenders and an attacking style that caught the attention of the entire world. Xabi had a good squad at his disposal, but it wasn't the best in Germany, let alone the world. Even so, it was one of the teams that stood out the most in world football. Much of this is due to how Xabi chose to organize his team, creating a system that maximized the strengths of his key players and provided many options to fit his squad. The system gave a lot of freedom to the wingbacks, Frimpong and Grimaldo, allowing them to push forward and disrupt plays in the attacking phase. Another key aspect was the ability of Leverkusen's wingers midfielders to play inside, in the tight spaces behind the opposing midfielders. The choice of a tactical system should take into account how a team attacks, and the pursuit of better offensive efficiency could be the reason for choosing a system with 3 defenders. Aggressiveness on the flanks, width, and internal play from advanced players. All of this without compromising defensive balance. In this video, we're not going to talk specifically about Bayer Leverkusen, but we'll try to understand when choosing a system with 3 defenders can provide offensive options for a team, even with an extra defender compared to the conventional setup. When we talk about offensiveness, it implies that we're talking about having more control of the game and the ball than the opponent. And for this reason, much of what we'll discuss here revolves around maintaining possession and progressing the attack with control of the situation. The use of 3 defenders can be useful precisely with these aspects in mind. Initially, we'll explain some concepts to make the idea of using 3 defenders clearer. First, the simplest, numerical superiority. As the name suggests, it's when your team has more players than the opponent in a particular area, usually around the ball. From an offensive standpoint, the idea is to overload the opponent's defenders, forcing them to leave some space unprotected or one of our players unmarked. The other concept is the organization of the attack in phases. Typically, attacks are divided into 3 phases: build-up, creation, and finishing. Build-up is the initial phase when our team maintains controlled possession, still outside the opponent's defensive block. In other words, when we haven't yet passed the ball beyond the first line of the opponent's defense. The objective is to move the defensive block and create a situation where the ball can be played into the defensive block without losing control. The second phase is creation, when the ball is already inside the opponent's block, and our team tries to create mechanisms and plays to give one of our players the best possible conditions to finish. The third phase is simply the finishing phase, where one of our players takes a shot with the obvious goal of scoring. A team that wants to be dominant needs to have clear mechanisms within these phases of attack, especially the first 2, which are more collective. Regardless of the tactical system, to attack consistently, you need to have greater ball control than the opponent. When you aim to control possession, it's obvious that your team needs to keep the ball at their feet, avoiding constant challenges for the ball, which would give the opponent a chance to win duels and regain possession. But to maintain control of possession, the ideal situation is for the player with the ball to always have safe, short passing options, so they don't have to resort to long balls unless it's a deliberate long pass, as long balls involve a higher risk of error and, consequently, loss of possession. And these options for the player with the ball need to be created in all phases of the attack, including the build-up, where everything begins. Typically, in the build-up phase, numerical superiority is essential for maintaining control of the ball. Many teams press with 2 players in the first line of defense. In this scenario, many teams usually position a 3rd player to create a numerical advantage. However, when playing with 3 defenders, this 3v2 situation is naturally created. But not every team presses with 2 players in that first line of defense. If there's only 1 player in that first line, having 3 players to initiate the build-up becomes a waste. So to continue generating an advantage, the ideal situation is for one of the 3 defenders to have the ability to push up into a more advanced attacking line, creating a 2v1 situation. For example, we can see the central player in that back 3 moving up behind the striker to function as a defensive midfielder, or depending on the opponent's second line, forming a duo with a central midfielder. Another approach is for one of the wide center backs to bypass the opponent's first line of defense. This is where many coaches adapt a more defensive fullback into the role of a 3rd center back. Here, we're not talking about a fullback who only temporarily drops into a back 3 during the build-up. We're talking about a fullback who truly plays as a center back, even during the defensive phase. We can cite examples like Simone Inzaghi's Inter Milan, which uses Pavard, originally a fullback, as the right-sided center-back, and Thomas Tuchel's Chelsea, Champions League winners in 2021, who often used Azpilicueta as the right-sided center-back. The logic behind adapting a fullback as a third center-back is precisely the flexibility it provides against the opponent's first line of defense. If they press with two players, you naturally maintain a back three. If they press with one, the fullback can push up on the flank. If they press with three, the team can switch to a back four, with the fullback moving into his natural position and one of the wing-backs dropping back to complete the back four. Of course, when playing with three defenders, the standard approach is usually a controlled back three during the build-up. Now, we've created a numerical advantage in the build-up that will help unsettle the opponent's first line of defense, right? But this advantage will be pointless if the team isn't able to transfer it to the more advanced areas. Here, the central midfielders play a crucial role. They're usually the ones who operate behind the first line, working the ball with the defenders, shifting the opposition until someone can break through the first line and get free, facing forward with controlled possession. This can happen through a pass to one of the central midfielders, who can turn to face forward, or by one of the defenders carrying the ball forward. In this example, we would be entering the creation phase. And when it comes to this more advanced phase, creation, a very important factor in almost all systems with three defenders is the role of the wingbacks. Often, the choice of using three defenders is precisely to allow the wingbacks to play higher up the field, providing significant width on the flanks, something that would be more difficult in a system with a back four. Imagine, for instance, a scenario where one of your team's main offensive weapons is the attacking quality of your fullbacks. In such a case, choosing a system with three defenders makes sense because it naturally creates a more solid defensive balance with at least three players specialized in defense, not requiring the wingbacks to stay back. Here, it's also worth noting the role of the two wide center backs in this back three. Obviously, these two defenders will have different responsibilities compared to when they play in a back four. When playing in a central defensive duo, in a back four of course, the center backs play more centrally, with the sides protected by the fullbacks. In a back three, these two wide center backs will be more exposed and will need to cover open spaces more frequently. They might also face more 1v1 situations than they would in a back four. This requires them to feel comfortable defending further away from the central corridor, which would be the natural habitat of center backs. And, ideally, these defenders should have more speed and agility than the central one. This could also be another reason for adapting a more defensive fullback as a center back, due to this comfort level. We brought this up because, as wingbacks tend to play very advanced in systems with three defenders, the wide center backs will often be responsible for covering the wingbacks on their respective sides. That said, let's return to the topic of wingbacks. As mentioned, the presence of three defenders pushes the wingbacks forward, creating a lot of width for the team as a whole. The wingbacks playing very wide and on the edge of the defensive line, even when the ball is on the opposite side, can be options for quick switches of play to try and create imbalance, either individually or through combinations. Of course, systems with three defenders require this offensive aptitude from the wingbacks. But in general, wingbacks have offensive roles more similar to traditional wingers, and depending on the player's individual characteristics, they can be players who excel in 1v1 situations, looking to reach the byline for crosses. They can be players who frequently attack the space behind the defensive line with diagonal runs, or they might simply fulfill a tactical role of drawing the opponent's fullbacks, slightly widening the defensive line, and creating space for central midfielders and forwards. Speaking of the more offensive players, they too can be impacted by the presence of three defenders, or even be the reason for choosing this type of system. Imagine, for example, a squad with a shortage of wingers. Since systems with three defenders push the wingbacks high up the field, there's no need to keep attackers wide on the flanks. In other words, you might even reduce the need for traditional wingers. Even in a 3-4-3, where you have two wingers and one striker, the wide players are pushed into the half spaces by the advancing wingbacks. This will require these players to be more adept at playing in tight spaces rather than relying on 1v1 skills, for instance. As a result, you could adapt by using two central midfielders, or one winger and one midfielder instead of traditional wingers. It ultimately depends on the coach's preference. The same logic applies if the coach wants to play with two strikers, especially if that's a strength of the squad. In that case, you could use a midfield trio, or two central midfielders with one more advanced midfielder. The possibilities are numerous. In summary, Using 3 defenders can be a way to capitalize on certain offensive strengths, such as talented attacking fullbacks, 2 strikers, or even to mitigate a weakness like a lack of wingers. Throughout the video, you saw some of the content from our channel being referenced on the screen. All of those are now appearing as links. Just pick the one you want to watch. Take care, and see you next time. Thanks!